The conference room on the 32nd floor had floor-to-ceiling windows, and on a clear morning you could see all the way to the river. Vivian Cross had always liked that view. She had eaten lunch by those windows 100 times, watched the seasons change from behind the glass, watched tugboats push slow and steady through the water while everything above it moved fast and loud. She liked the stillness of it. She was thinking about that view when she heard them talking about her. She had not meant to stop in the hallway. She had come up to the 32nd floor to drop off a contract amendment for Lawrence Hamill, the firm's managing partner, because his assistant had called in sick and the document needed his signature before 4. That was all. She was going to knock, leave the folder, take the elevator back down to 28. 45 seconds, maybe a minute. But the door to the small conference room at the end of the hall was not fully closed, and the voices coming through the gap were voices she recognized. "She doesn't belong in that seat," said the first voice. It belonged to Craig Sutton, a senior associate who had been at Hargrove & Wills for 11 years and spoke about those 11 years the way some people speak about military service, with gravity, with implied sacrifice, with the expectation that you would be impressed. She's been here, 14 months? She's sitting in on partner track reviews now. You know who else was sitting in on partner track reviews at 14 months? Nobody. She's good, said the second voice. That one was Philip Reed, equity partner, corner office, the kind of man who wore the same brand of watch he had worn since business school because he had decided early what kind of person he was and saw no reason to revisit the question. That's just the truth. She's good, and Hamill knows it. She's good at managing up. There's a difference. A pause. Either way, Craig said, and his voice had shifted into something that sounded almost casual, almost offhanded, the way a voice does when it is about to say something it knows it probably shouldn't. Either way, it doesn't matter. She's not going to make it through the Caldwell project. Not at the pace they're running it. You want to make it interesting? Vivian Cross stood very still in that hallway. She was 31 years old. She had graduated top of her class from Georgetown Law, passed the bar on her first attempt, and spent 2 years at a smaller firm in Philadelphia before a recruiter had called her about Hargrove & Wills, and she had taken a Tuesday off and flown to New York for the interview. She had been in this city for 14 months, as Craig had noted, and she had not once been late on a deliverable. Not one. She had billed more hours than anyone at her level in her first quarter, had stepped in on the Caldwell project when the original associate had a family emergency, and had restructured the timeline in a way that the client had actually thanked, in writing, which almost never happened. She knew all of this. She also knew that it was a Friday afternoon, the hallway was empty, and 2 men on the other side of a door that was 3 inches from closed were placing a bet on whether she would survive the next 8 weeks. She heard the number. She heard Craig say he'd take the under. She heard Philip laugh, not a cruel laugh, but the kind that comes from a man who has grown comfortable with the distance between himself and the people below him on the org chart, comfortable enough that the distance stops feeling like anything at all. Vivian picked up the contract folder, which she had at some point gripped tight enough to bend one corner, straightened it with her thumb, and continued down the hall to Lawrence Hamill's office. She knocked twice. "Come in." The managing partner of Hargrove & Wills was a man in his early 60s with white hair that had been white since his 40s, and a reputation for reading people the way other people read case files, thoroughly, without sentiment, and with considerable retention. He was standing at the window when she entered. The river was right there behind him, gray-green in the afternoon light. "The Caldwell Amendment," Vivian said. She set the folder on his desk. "Page 4 needs your signature and initials on the margin note. The client wants it by end of day." Lawrence turned from the window. He looked at her for a moment the way he sometimes did, a beat longer than the conversation required. "You walked from the elevator," he said. "Yes, past the small conference room." She met his eyes. "I did." He nodded once, the way he nodded when a piece of information confirmed something he already suspected rather than surprised him. He sat down, opened the folder, signed where she had marked. He did not say anything else, and she did not offer anything else, and when she left his office she pulled the door closed behind her quietly, the way you close a door in a room where someone is sleeping. The Caldwell project was a merger review. Caldwell Industrial Supply, a family-owned distribution company based in Cincinnati, was being acquired by a private equity firm out of Boston. The deal had more moving parts than anyone had anticipated when it landed on the firm's desk 6 weeks earlier. There were 3 subsidiaries, 2 pending litigation matters, a union contract up for renewal, and an earn-out structure that the client's original attorney had drafted in a way that would have caused problems for years if no one had caught it. Vivian had caught it. That was week 2. She had been sitting at her desk at 11:30 on a Thursday night, working through the disclosure schedules when she found the clause. It was buried in an exhibit, cross-referenced to a section that had been renumbered in a previous draft without the reference being updated, which meant that anyone reading quickly, anyone not reading the way Vivian read, with a legal pad and a highlighter and the kind of attention that her law school contracts professor had called forensic patience, would have missed it entirely. She flagged it. She wrote a 3-paragraph summary. She sent it to the partner on the matter at 11:47, with an apology for the hour. The partner, a woman named Rosalind Faber who had the energy of someone who had long since stopped apologizing for her own hours, had called Vivian's cell at midnight. "You're sure?" Rosalind said. "I'm sure. This is a good catch, Vivian. Thank you. I mean it. This would have been a problem." She had slept 4 hours that night and been at her desk by 7. She had not mentioned the catch to anyone. She did not think of it as something to mention. It was her job. She had done her job. But now it was week 8. The final stretch before the deal closed, and the pressure had a different texture to it than it had before. The client was anxious. The opposing counsel was being difficult in the particular way that opposing counsel gets difficult when they know the deal is going to close anyway, and they are simply performing difficulty as a matter of professional pride. The timeline was tight. Vivian was managing 3 junior associates, 2 of whom were excellent and one of whom, a second year named Grant, who had come from a family that had 3 alumni at the firm, had begun missing internal deadlines in ways that were small enough to explain but cumulative enough to matter. She had spoken to Grant once about it, gently. She had spoken to him a second time, less gently. She had not yet spoken to Rosalind about it because she had not wanted to escalate something she thought she could manage, and because she knew, with the particular awareness that women at firms like this one tend to develop early, that the line between raising a concern and being seen as difficult was thinner than it appeared on paper. That Thursday, the week after she had stood in the hallway and heard her name used as a wager, Grant missed a deadline that was not small. The diligence memo was due to the client by noon. It was 11:50 when Vivian went to the shared folder and found that Grant had uploaded a draft that was dated the previous Tuesday and was missing the entire environmental review section. She called him. He did not answer. She texted him. She waited 2 minutes. Nothing. She sat very still at her desk for 1 moment, and then she opened the environmental files herself, and she wrote the section, and she formatted it, and she read it twice, and she submitted the complete memo at 11:58. She sat in the chair after she sent it and looked at her hands on the keyboard and thought about a lot of things. She thought about the 5 years she had spent becoming the person who could write that section in 8 minutes. She thought about the fact that Grant would probably never know she had done it, or if he found out, would probably experience it as a kindness rather than a correction. She thought about Craig Sutton on the 32nd floor and what the odds had looked like to him when he made that bet. She opened a new document. She began to write. Grant Holloway found her in the break room at 2 in the afternoon with the look of a man who had pieced together what had happened and was deciding in real time whether to lead with gratitude or defensiveness. He chose a version of both, which is the most difficult combination to respond to. "I had a family thing this morning," he said. "My phone died." Vivian poured coffee into a paper cup. She did not turn around. "The memo was submitted," she said. "The client acknowledged receipt. We're fine." "I know, I saw." "Vivian, Grant." She turned around now. She said his name the way she might address a paragraph that needed rewriting. Not with anger, not with condescension, but with a certain directness that made it clear she was not going to pretend. "The diligence memo was your deliverable. It wasn't submitted by you. I need you to understand why that matters, because I need to know that it won't happen again. It won't. I need it not to matter what your phone does in the morning. I need you to have contingencies. That's not me being hard on you. That's the job." He was quiet for a moment. He was 25 and had grown up in Connecticut and had the slightly startled look of someone encountering a standard that hadn't previously been applied to him. "Okay," he said. "Yeah, you're right." She nodded. She picked up her coffee. She went back to her desk. She did not tell Rosalind. But she began keeping a record. The call came on a Tuesday morning, 2 weeks before the Caldwell deal was scheduled to close. It came from a number she didn't recognize, area code 212, And she almost didn't answer because she was in the middle of a sentence in a client communication, and she had a rule about that. But something made her pick up. "Is this Vivian Cross?" The voice was professional, unhurried, the voice of someone who made calls like this regularly and had stopped being nervous about them. "It is. My name is Dana Ellison. I'm a partner at Mercer Payne. I got your name from a colleague who spoke very highly of your work on a deal last spring. I'd love to buy you a coffee sometime this week if you're open to it." Mercer Payne was not a firm you turned down for coffee. It was one of the 6 largest in the city, and it had a reputation for the kind of work that required people who could write environmental review sections in 8 minutes and catch earn-out clause errors at 11:30 on a Thursday night. "I can do Thursday," Vivian said. She finished her sentence in the client communication before she wrote it in her calendar. She told no one about the meeting. Not Rosalind, not her office neighbor Petra, who was her closest thing to a friend at the firm, and who had brought her soup once when she had worked through a fever on a closing deal, not her mother, who called every Sunday and whose opinion of law firms in general was that they consumed their young and called it mentorship. She went to the coffee shop on Thursday morning at 8:15. Dana Ellison was already there. She was in her mid-50s, compact and direct, with the slightly compressed energy of a person who has learned to accomplish a great deal in a small amount of time and is perpetually, mildly irritated at the world for not keeping up. They talked for 90 minutes. At 45 minutes, Vivian understood that this was not a casual conversation. At 60 minutes, she understood what was being offered. At 90 minutes, she asked a question about the firm's approach to associate development that made Dana Ellison sit back in her chair and say, "That is exactly the right question to ask," in a tone that suggested it was not a question she was asked often. Vivian thanked her for the coffee and walked back to the office in the cold morning air and felt for the first time in a long time that she was standing on ground that was entirely her own. The Caldwell deal closed on a Wednesday. There was a closing dinner, which was not exactly a celebration. Deal closings in M&A rarely are, because the work doesn't actually end at closing, it just changes shape. But it was the kind of dinner where people ordered the good wine and said well done to each other in a way that meant it. Craig Sutton was there. He sat at the far end of the table. He had not been on the Caldwell matter at any point, but he was senior enough that he had been included in the dinner, which was simply how these things worked. At some point during the main course, Rosalind Faber stood up and said a few words about the deal and about the team. She mentioned the catch in week 2. She said Vivian's name. She said it without preamble and without the hedging language that people sometimes use when crediting a woman in a room full of men, as if they need to pad the compliment against anticipated disagreement. She just said it. Vivian caught it. At midnight. "That's why we're sitting here tonight." Vivian looked at her plate. She felt the particular warmth of being seen by someone who meant it. She did not look at Craig Sutton. But she was aware, the way you are aware of a sound you are pretending not to hear, that he had gone quiet. She submitted her resignation the following Monday. She had written the letter over the weekend, in the apartment she had been slowly making into a place that felt like hers. The good lamp she had bought at the flea market on Atlantic Avenue, the bookshelf she had assembled herself on a rainy Saturday, the small painting above the desk that a friend had done years ago, all blues and greens that she had always loved without being able to say exactly why. The letter was 2 paragraphs. It was warm and it was professional, and it said exactly as much as it needed to say and not one word more. She gave it to Lawrence Hamill in person. He read it without speaking. Then he set it down on the desk and looked at her, the way he had looked at her in the hallway 3 weeks ago when she had come to deliver the contract folder, that beat longer than necessary look. "Mercer Payne?" he said. "Yes." He nodded. He was quiet for a moment. Outside the window behind him the river moved, slow and gray in the November light. "I should have moved faster," he said. It was not quite an apology. It was the kind of thing a person says when they have been watching something happen and waiting too long to intervene, and have waited long enough that intervening is no longer the relevant action. "You have a strong team," Vivian said. "They'll be fine. I know they will." He paused. "Will you?" She thought about Dana Ellison sitting across from her in the coffee shop, saying that is exactly the right question. She thought about the letter she had not sent yet, the one sitting in her drafts, to the union contact at Caldwell, following up on something she had noticed in the contract that had nothing to do with her firm's scope, but that she had thought the contact should know about anyway. Because it was the right thing to do, and she had never been able to separate the right thing from the practical thing as neatly as some people managed to. "Yes," she said. "I'll be fine." She meant it the way you mean something when you have spent years building the interior architecture that makes it true, not as optimism, not as performance, but as a quiet and well-earned fact. Her last day was a Friday in December. She packed her desk into a single box, which surprised her. She had spent over a year in this office and had apparently acquired very little in the way of things. The lamp, a legal pad. 3 pens she actually liked. The small succulent Petra had given her at Christmas the previous year, which had survived 14 months on a windowsill that got direct sun for exactly 45 minutes a day, and had Vivian considered a form of personal achievement. Petra hugged her in the hallway. "Don't be a stranger," Petra said. "I won't." Grant appeared in the doorway of her office with the look of someone who was not entirely sure he deserved to be there but had shown up anyway, which she gave him credit for. "Thank you," he said, "for being straight with me. You did good work in the last month," she said. "Build on that." She rode the elevator down alone. The lobby of the building was busy the way Manhattan lobbies are busy on Friday afternoons, people moving in every direction with the focused urgency of people who have somewhere to be. Vivian Cross walked through it with her one box and did not rush. Outside, the air was cold and smelled like the city, exhaust and stone and the faint ghost of something roasting from the food cart on the corner. She stood on the sidewalk for a moment and looked up, out of habit, at the 32nd floor, at the windows where the conference room was, where 2 men had sat on a Friday afternoon, and decided she was a variable worth betting against. She had not thought about the bet much in the past few weeks. There had not been much room for it, and besides, it had not turned out to be about her. It had turned out to be about them, about the gap between what they could see and what was actually there. About the particular blindness that comes from looking at someone and seeing only what you expect to find. She picked up her box and started walking. The Mercer Payne offices were 4 blocks north. She was not due to start for another 3 weeks. She was not walking there now. She was simply walking, because it was Friday and she was 31, and the city was loud and cold and entirely indifferent to her in the way she had always loved, the way that meant she could be anything here if she was willing to do the work. She was willing. She had always been willing. That was the thing they had never managed to factor in.